surprised when I received a telephone call from the Dayton committee a couple of months ago, telling me that I had been selected as Amateur of the Year. I was shocked and surprised, pleased, shocked and surprised, not necessarily in that order.
Well, your background, the ham radio operators will know who you are and will know your background. This will be on television. We'll use this for, regular folks will see it. Larry, give me a little bit of your life in ham radio.
I became an amateur in 1951, the year that I graduated from high school. I went to Little Rock Central High School of Little Rock, Arkansas integration fame in the 50s. And the year I finished high school was the same year that the FCC decided to introduce the novice license to the amateur ranks. And so I was one of the first novices licensed in the United States, because that new class of license, a kind of beginner's license, began that year. Little Rock, where I lived, was what was then called a quarterly examining point. That is, there was no FCC office in that town, so we were in the district of the FCC district office in New Orleans, Louisiana. So every 3 months, a team of traveling examiners came from New Orleans to cities like Little Rock, went to the federal building, and on a published day, administers exams. And I went, as a high school student, I went down there, stood in line, took the exam, fortunately passed it, and became a licensed amateur. That was 1951, and I've been a licensed amateur ever since. You can do the math to see that's a long time.
It's a long time. And though it isn't unusual, and especially in a place like this location with all these folks brought together, is it unusual to meet people who've been involved this long? It is pretty unusual to meet someone whose experience has been so broad and so involved in really the structure of the amateur.
Well, after I became a licensed amateur, I was interested in electronic stuff. And in those days, we didn't have things like personal computers and cell phones. So amateur radio was a way for me to continue my involvement in learning about electronics. It's what prompted me when I went to college to study electrical engineering. That turned out not to be the right career choice for me, because although I was interested in doing it as a hobby, doing it on my personal time, I found it frankly a little bit boring doing it all day after I graduated from college. But I had a degree, so I went to work for an aerospace contractor in the guided missile program. I did that for a couple of years. Since I was no longer a college student, Uncle Sam said, "Oh, we still have the draft. You were deferred while you were in college because you were majoring in an important subject, but you're not in college anymore, so you should serve Uncle Sam." Hey, thanks, Chip. So I got drafted into the Army, did my obligated period of military service. Fortunately, we weren't in war with anyone at the time, so I was a peacetime veteran. Finished that, went back to work at my contractor, and I noticed the people around me that seemed to be getting promoted and getting ahead, although they had technical and engineering backgrounds, weren't strictly speaking working as engineers. They were doing administrative things, and I didn't know what they were doing. In other words, I had no background and no training in anything except where you used soldering irons and tools. So I decided to go back to college and get an MBA, which I did. And after I completed my MBA, I did satisfactory in the coursework. So my major professor said, "Hey, you did well. Would you like to get a PhD?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds nice, but I don't have the money to continue going to college. It's hard enough to leave industry and go get a master's." And he said, "Oh, I can give you a job as a teaching assistant. So he did. And I started as a teaching assistant, and I kind of liked that. And so I wound up with a PhD, and I majored in economics. And in return for the money he was paying me, he wanted me to teach a couple classes. And that sounded like fun. So I never went back to the defense contractor, although technically I was on leave. So I became a full-time teacher, and I was until I retired. Along the way, based on being an engineer and having studied economics, I took an interest in pension plans and planning, financial planning. And I live in Georgia, and the governor of Georgia, in his infinite wisdom, decided to appoint me as an expert to the State Pension Board of Trustees, which he did. So for a number of years, I was a trustee of the state pension plan in Georgia, which is a large pension plan. Of all the pension plans in America, including state and public, and including pension plans of industries like big companies like General Motors and AT&T and the Bell system, of all the pension plans in America, the Georgia State Plan is the 25th largest of those thousands of pension plans. So it's a big pension plan. It has billions of dollars of assets. And so I learned how that all works. And unfortunately, my wife, when I was 55 years old, my wife was struck with cancer, and she died. And so I went to my boss at the university and said, I'm retiring. And he said, well, you're only 55 years old. You can't retire. And I said, well, you remember a few years ago when the governor appointed me to the pension system, I know a lot about how the pension system works, including all the fine print. And in the fine print, there is a provision which I now invoke, which allows me to retire with full benefits, although I'm only 55. So I retired. That was 20 years ago. So for the last 20 years, I've been working for myself in the sense I haven't been employed except as a full-time ham. For the last 20 years, I've been a full-time ham radio volunteer, first for ARL and then for the International Amateur Radio Union.
Well, you're sitting right in front of me. You know, your background's that International Amateur Radio Union poster there. Tell me about your involvement with that.
Well, I was the president.
That's pretty involved.
Well, for a while I was the vice president, and then for a while I was the secretary. There are only three officers, the president, the vice president, and the secretary. Actually, I'm the only person who has ever served all three volunteer positions in the International Amateur Radio Union. And I'm the past president of the International Amateur Radio Union. The president was sitting right here. He's gone on a break right now. He was my vice president, Tim Ellum from Calgary, Canada. Unfortunately, he's not only younger than I am, he's still employed. So he actually can't do this full time. He actually has to work for a living sometimes. I don't have to. But I'm now old and retired. I'm at retirement age even if I wasn't retired. So I'm actually now retired from my volunteer work. So now I am just a full-time amateur.
Well, you look really happy. You look great sitting here, man. And I tell you what, you got such a big smile.
Well, there's two reasons. One is I'm sitting down, and I don't have to walk around on this hard floor. And the other is it's been a rewarding experience because I got to go to a lot of countries in my service with International Amateur Radio Union and meet a lot of important officials from foreign governments and do lots of stuff that otherwise might never have happened. So I have owe a big debt to the International Amateur Radio Union for giving me that opportunity. Now, these two guys who are my colleagues there with the International Amateur Radio Union are doing those things now. And I just envy their youth and opportunity to continue to doing them. I'm now a dropout.
Let me shake your hand. It's sure great to see you.
Thanks for stopping by.